The soft glow of candlelight at Aria, one of downtown's most exclusive restaurants, was supposed to be his victory lap. David Pierce adjusted his tie, the silk a little too tight, and gave his girlfriend Brittany a smug smile. This was the life he deserved, the life he had chosen over the quiet, predictable comfort of his marriage. Across the table, Brittany was snapping a perfectly angled photo of her cocktail for her followers. Everything was perfect, until he saw her. In the restaurant's most coveted booth sat his ex-wife Lauren, and the sight of her, laughing with the man beside her, was about to turn his triumphant dinner into the most humiliating night of his life. The reservation at Aria had been a strategic move. David had pulled a few strings, called in a favor he'd been saving, all to secure a table on a Friday night. It was the kind of place that signaled arrival, a declaration of success printed in gold leaf on a thick, cream-colored menu. For David, it was more than just dinner. It was a performance for Brittany, for himself, and for the ghosts of a life he had eagerly dismantled. "Isn't this place amazing, babe?" Brittany said, her voice a breathy whisper that always seemed designed for an audience. She lowered her phone, her blue eyes framed by impossibly long lashes, scanning the room with an appraiser's gaze. "The lighting in here is everything. My post is already getting, 100 likes." "Only the best for you," David replied, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. Her nails were long and crimson, a stark contrast to the chipped, practical nails Lauren used to have from her work in the garden. He felt a familiar surge of self-satisfaction. This was an upgrade. Brittany was vibrant, exciting, a 24-year-old social media manager who understood the importance of aesthetics and ambition. She was, in his mind, a reflection of his own renewed potential. His marriage to Lauren had ended just over a year ago, but the emotional divorce had happened long before that. He had come to see their 10-year marriage as a comfortable cage. Lauren was kind, steady, and intelligent, a history teacher who found joy in dusty books and quiet evenings. But to David, that steady light had begun to feel dim. He was a senior project manager at a rapidly growing tech firm, a world of shark-like ambition and relentless forward momentum. He'd started to resent her contentment, misinterpreting it as a lack of drive. He'd told himself she was holding him back. The affair with Brittany had been a spark in the gray monotony. It was reckless and exciting, full of clandestine meetings and the thrill of the forbidden. When Lauren found the text, the subsequent confrontation had been devastatingly quiet. There was no screaming, no plates thrown, just a hollowed-out look in her eyes as she absorbed the casual cruelty of his betrayal. "I just don't love you anymore, Lauren," he had said, the words tasting like freedom. "We want different things. I want to live. You're happy to just exist." The divorce had been swift. Lauren asked for very little. Just the small house they had bought together and enough to get back on her feet. She had quit her teaching job years ago to support his career, moving cities for his promotions, managing their home so he could focus on climbing the corporate ladder. David, in a moment of what he considered magnanimity, had agreed. He was moving on to bigger and better things after all. He could afford to be generous with the scraps of their old life. Now sitting in Aria, sipping a 12-year-old scotch that cost more than a week's worth of their old grocery bills, he felt vindicated. Brittany was chattering about an influencer trip to Bali, her face illuminated by her phone screen. He was half listening, his mind replaying his recent successes at work. He'd landed a major client last month. A promotion was on the horizon. Life was a straight, upward trajectory. It was during a lull in Brittany's monologue that his eyes drifted across the room. Aria was designed for seeing and being seen, with tables arranged in tiered levels. And there, in a secluded corner booth by the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city skyline, was Lauren. For a moment, his brain refused to process the image. It was like seeing a character from a black-and-white film suddenly appear in vibrant Technicolor. The Lauren he remembered wore cardigans and sensible shoes. Her hair was usually pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her face was bare, save for a touch of lip balm. The woman in the booth was different. Her honey blonde hair was styled in soft waves that caught the light, cascading over the shoulders of an elegant, midnight blue dress that seemed poured onto her frame. She wore a delicate necklace that sparkled at her throat. She wasn't wearing a lot of makeup, but her features seemed sharper, more defined. She looked radiant. It was a word he had never once associated with her. She was leaning forward, her expression animated as she spoke to the man opposite her. A laugh escaped her, a genuine, uninhibited sound that seemed to carry across the hushed restaurant, and David felt a strange, unwelcome jolt. He couldn't remember the last time he had made her laugh like that. "What is it?" Brittany asked, her voice sharp, annoyed that she had lost his attention. David didn't answer. He just stared. His first thought was a surge of proprietary irritation. What was she doing here? This was his place, his world. She didn't belong in a restaurant where the water was imported and the bread came with 3 different types of artisanal butter. Who could she possibly be with that could afford a place like this? He squinted, trying to get a better look at the man. He couldn't see the man's face clearly, only his profile. He looked older, maybe late 40s, with distinguished silvering at his temples. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, the kind that didn't shout its price but whispered it in every flawless seam. The man listened to Lauren with an intensity that made David's jaw tighten. It was a look of complete and utter fascination. A waiter approached their table, addressing the man with a deference that was reserved for the highest echelon of clientele. David watched, a knot of unease forming in his stomach. This wasn't some random date. There was an air of importance around their table, a quiet bubble of significance that the rest of the room seemed to bend around. His carefully constructed evening, his monument to his new and improved life, suddenly felt fragile, threatened by a ghost from his past who had dared to show up looking happier and more beautiful than he had ever remembered. "David, hello!" Brittany snapped her fingers in front of his face. "Are you even listening to me? I was talking about the influencer package for the new skincare line." "Yeah, sorry," David mumbled, his gaze still locked on the corner booth. I think I see someone I know." Brittany followed his line of sight. Her eyes, expertly trained to assess and categorize, narrowed on Lauren. A small, contemptuous smirk played on her lips. "Wait, is that your ex, Lauren?" She let out a short, sharp laugh. "Seriously? What is she doing here? I thought her idea of a big night out was the local bookstore getting a new shipment." The comment was designed to be a bonding moment, a shared jab at the past he had left behind. Normally, David would have chuckled along, reinforcing the narrative that he had escaped a life of beige dullness. But tonight, the joke fell flat. The woman Brittany was sneering at didn't look like the caricature of a boring homebody he had painted. She looked poised, elegant, and utterly captivating. "I don't know," David said, his voice tight. "She looks different." "She looks like she's trying too hard," Brittany countered, already dismissing her. "And who's the old guy she's with? Her dad? Maybe he's treating her to a pity dinner after the divorce." David didn't correct her. He let the assumption hang in the air, a flimsy shield against a feeling he couldn't quite name. It was a cocktail of disbelief, jealousy, and a strange, primal sense of being wronged. He was the one who was supposed to be thriving. He was the one who had moved on to a more glamorous life. Lauren was supposed to be quietly rebuilding, perhaps dating some other boring teacher or a local librarian. She wasn't supposed to be here, in his territory, glowing. He watched them intently, his food growing cold on his plate. He analyzed every detail, searching for a flaw in the perfect picture she presented. He noticed the way the man, definitely not her father, leaned in when she spoke, his entire focus on her. He saw the way Lauren's hand rested on the table, and how the man's hand briefly covered hers, a gesture of easy intimacy that sent a hot spike of anger through David's chest. Who was this guy? A lawyer? A doctor? He had an air of quiet confidence, the kind that came from genuine power, not the loud, performative bravado David often employed in boardrooms. The man wore a watch, a simple, elegant timepiece with a dark leather strap. It wasn't flashy like the chunky designer watch David had bought himself after his last bonus, but David had been around enough wealthy clients to recognize its understated class. It was a Patek Philippe, a watch that cost more than his car. The knot in his stomach tightened into a cold, hard stone. He's probably just some rich, divorced guy looking for a quiet, uncomplicated woman to play house with. David said, more to convince himself than Brittany. She's good at that. Playing house. Brittany, however, was losing interest in Lauren and growing increasingly irritated with David's obsession. Can we please talk about something else? This was supposed to be our night. I wanted to take a picture of us for my feed. Hashtag power couple. She held up her phone, angling for a selfie. David forced a smile, the muscles in his face feeling stiff and unnatural. The flash went off, capturing a perfect image of a happy, successful couple. But as he looked at the photo on Brittany's screen, her perfect pout, his strained grin, all he could see was a lie. He felt like a fraud. He glanced back at Lauren's table. The waiter was pouring them champagne, a vintage bottle that David knew Aria reserved for its most esteemed guests. Lauren was laughing again, her head tilted back, her throat exposed in a graceful arc. She looked completely at ease, as if she had been dining in places like this her entire life. He remembered the arguments they used to have about money. He'd always wanted to go to fancy restaurants, to buy flashy things that broadcasted his success. Lauren had always been more frugal, preferring to save for a new roof or a vacation they could actually afford. He had called her sensible. What he'd meant was boring. He had accused her of being afraid to enjoy life. Watching her now effortlessly elegant in a room dripping with luxury, he felt a profound sense of cognitive dissonance. Had he ever really known her? Or had he only ever seen a version of her that fit his narrative? The quiet, supportive wife who existed in his shadow. The man with her said something, and Lauren's smile softened into one of deep affection. She reached out and touched his cheek. It was a gesture so tender, so full of unspoken history, that it felt like a physical blow to David. It was a gesture she had never made with him, not even in their happiest years. He felt a wave of possessiveness so intense it shocked him. That was his wife, his ex-wife. She was the mother of the future children they had once planned. She was the keeper of a decade of his life, and she was sitting across the room, looking at another man with a love and adoration that he had never managed to inspire. The narrative was crumbling. He wasn't the one who had escaped. He was the one who had been left behind. The fiction David had been carefully constructing around Lauren's dinner date began to fray at the edges. He was a project manager. His job was to identify variables, assess risks, and connect the dots. His mind, now whirring with a toxic mix of adrenaline and envy, started to analyze the scene with forensic intensity. The deference of the staff was the first major clue. It wasn't just good service, it was reverence. Marco, the maître d'honneur, a man notoriously stoic and unimpressed by the city's parade of minor celebrities and finance bros, had personally visited their table twice. He wasn't just checking on them, he was holding court, laughing at something the man said, his posture almost deferential. Marco had barely given David a nod on his way in. Then there was the wine. The sommelier had presented the bottle as if it were a holy relic. David, who prided himself on knowing a bit about wine, craned his neck to see the label. It was a Domaine de la Romanée Conti. He felt his breath catch. He'd only read about that wine in magazines. It was the kind of bottle that wasn't on the menu. You had to be someone to even know to ask for it. A bottle could cost upwards of $30,000. There is no way, he whispered to himself. No way what? Brittany asked, scrolling through her phone. That Crystal is getting more brand deals than me? I know, it's totally unfair. I think she buys her followers. No, not that, David snapped, his patience worn thin. That guy, with Lauren, there's something off. His eyes darted around the restaurant, searching for more data. He saw a well-known city councilman at a nearby table glance over at the corner booth, give a small, respectful nod, and then quickly look away, as if not wanting to intrude. It was a gesture of recognition and respect. An idea, ludicrous and terrifying, began to form in David's mind. This man wasn't just a rich doctor or a successful lawyer. He was in a different stratosphere entirely. Give me your phone, he demanded from Brittany. What? Why? I'm in the middle of a comment war, she protested. Just give it to me. She huffed and handed it over. David's fingers flew across the screen, his mind racing. Who were the biggest players in the city? Who were the quiet, powerful figures who didn't splash their faces all over social media. He typed in most powerful tech CEOs in the state. A list of articles appeared. He scrolled through them, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. And then he saw it. It was a picture from a feature in Forbes magazine, titled The Quiet Titans of Tech. The man in the photo was slightly younger, his hair a little darker, but the profile was unmistakable. The strong jawline, the intelligent eyes, the subtle air of authority. The name below the picture was Owen Devereaux. David felt the air leave his lungs in a rush, as if he'd been punched in the gut. Owen Devereaux. He wasn't just a CEO, he was a legend, a near-mythical figure in the tech world. Devereaux was a software architect who had founded one of the most successful cybersecurity firms on the planet in his early 20s. He was notoriously private, rarely giving interviews or appearing in public. He was a billionaire many times over, known for his philanthropy and his almost ascetic lifestyle, despite his immense wealth. David looked from the phone screen to the man in the corner booth. Owen Devereaux was laughing, pouring Lauren a glass of obscenely expensive wine, and looking at her like she was the only person in the world. "Oh my God," David breathed. "What? What is it?" Brittany snatched her phone back, her curiosity finally piqued. She looked at the screen, her eyes widening. "Wait a second, is that Owen Devereaux?" "No way, the Owen Devereaux?" Brittany, who curated her life around aspiration and influence, knew exactly who he was. Devereaux was not just rich, he was legacy rich. He was A-list, a name that opened every door. Her mind immediately shifted from annoyance to frantic calculation. "Are you sure that's him?" she whispered, her voice a mix of awe and disbelief. She discreetly angled her phone, trying to zoom in on the corner booth for a picture. "Don't do that," David hissed, grabbing her wrist. "You'll look like a pathetic fangirl." "Well, look at you," she shot back, yanking her hand away. "You've been staring at them like a stalker all night. So your boring little ex-wife is on a date with a billionaire, a legitimate, actual billionaire." Her tone had changed. The earlier contempt was gone, replaced by a sharp, cutting curiosity. How on earth did that happen? That was the question screaming in David's own mind. How? How did Lauren, the woman who used to coupon and thought a splurge was buying organic vegetables, end up with Owen Devereaux? The man could have any woman in the world. Supermodels, actresses, heiresses. Why would he choose Lauren? Every memory David had of his ex-wife was now being recontextualized through this horrifying new lens. Her quietness, was it poise? Her love of reading, was it a sign of a deep intellect that Devereaux found stimulating? Her kindness and steadiness, were those the very qualities a man who lived in a world of sharks would find invaluable? All the things he had labeled as flaws, as reasons to leave her, were suddenly being validated as virtues by a man who was, by every conceivable metric, superior to him. It was a complete and total repudiation of his judgment. His entire sense of self, built on the foundation of his decision to leave Lauren for a better life, was cracking under the weight of this single revelation. He wasn't just an ex-husband watching his former wife on a date. He was a man in a mid-range sedan, watching her climb into a private jet. The chasm between his life and hers, which he had imagined was a gap he had created through his own ambition, was now an impossibly vast canyon, and he was standing on the wrong side. Just as David was trying to process the cataclysmic revelation, a subtle shift occurred in the restaurant's atmosphere. The low hum of conversation seemed to dip. The clinking of cutlery softened. It was as if the entire room was subconsciously holding its breath. David watched, mesmerized and horrified, as Owen Devereaux pushed his chair back slightly. He said something to Lauren, his voice too low to hear, but his expression was one of profound sincerity. Lauren looked at him, her eyes wide, a dawning realization on her face. Then, with a grace that seemed impossible for a man of his stature, Owen moved from his seat and knelt on one knee beside the table. A collective, muffled gasp rippled through the nearby tables. Brittany's hand flew to her mouth, her phone held aloft, the red dot of the record button blinking steadily. She was capturing every second of David's impending humiliation. "No," David whispered. the word a dry crackle in his throat. No, he's not. But he was. Owen Devereaux, a man who could buy islands and change the course of industries with a single phone call, was kneeling on the floor of a restaurant. For Lauren. For his Lauren. He produced a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. He didn't open it right away. First he spoke. Though David couldn't hear the words, he could read the intent on Owen's face. This wasn't a showy public performance. It was an intimate, heartfelt declaration that they just happened to be witnesses to. He spoke of her character, her strength, her quiet brilliance. David could imagine the words, and each imagined syllable was a fresh twist of the knife in his gut. He was probably praising the very qualities David had mocked and discarded. Lauren's hands were covering her mouth, and tears were streaming freely down her face. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. A joy so profound it seemed to light her up from within, making her more luminous than ever. Owen finally opened the box. From across the room, even David could see the ring. It wasn't a gaudy monstrosity, not the kind of look-at-me rock that Brittany would have coveted. It was an exquisite emerald-cut diamond, flanked by two smaller sapphires. It was timeless, elegant, and impossibly beautiful. It was a ring that spoke not of wealth, but of taste and a deep understanding of the woman it was intended for. Lauren loved sapphires. She'd once pointed one out in a dusty antique shop window years ago. A fleeting moment David had long since forgotten. Owen Devereaux had not forgotten, or perhaps he had simply taken the time to learn. A moment of suspended silence hung in the air. Then Lauren nodded, a convulsive, happy motion. Yes, she whispered, the word lost to the room but clear as day in her expression. Of course, yes. Owen slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He stood up, and Lauren rose with him, launching herself into his arms. He held her, burying his face in her hair, and for a moment they were the only two people in the universe. Then the room erupted. Spontaneous, genuine applause broke out from the surrounding tables. Marco, the maitre d', beamed like a proud father and arrived at their table with 2 flutes and a bottle of champagne that looked even more expensive than the last. People were smiling, raising their glasses to the newly engaged couple. It was a scene from a movie, a perfect storybook moment. For David, it was the final scene of a tragedy, and he was the villain. He was frozen in his chair, a statue carved from rage and regret. His blood roared in his ears, drowning out the applause. He could feel dozens of eyes on him. People knew who he was. Their divorce hadn't been a secret among their old social circle. He could feel their pity, their schadenfreude. That's the guy who left her. That's the fool who threw away a diamond and didn't even realize it. Wow, Brittany breathed, finally lowering her phone. She replayed the video, a voracious, triumphant look on her face. This is going to get so many views. Can you believe it? She's going to be Mrs. Devereaux. She looked from the video to David, her eyes cold and analytical, as if seeing him for the first time. The man she had hitched her wagon to, the successful project manager, suddenly looked very small. The applause died down, but the celebratory buzz remained. Lauren and Owen were oblivious to the rest of the room, lost in their own happiness. Lauren was looking at the ring on her finger, her hand trembling slightly, a smile of pure disbelief and wonder on her face. David couldn't breathe. The air in the restaurant felt thick and suffocating. This public spectacle was more than just an announcement of Lauren's happiness. It was a verdict on his failure. He hadn't just lost a wife, he had lost a future he was too stupid to recognize. He had traded a life of substance for one of surface-level flash, and the universe had decided to rub it in his face in the most spectacular way imaginable. The smug satisfaction he had felt upon entering the restaurant was a distant memory, replaced by a searing, acidic shame. He had wanted to show Brittany he was a winner. Instead, in the reflection of that stunning sapphire and diamond ring, he had never looked more like a loser. And the night was far from over. The fragile dam of David's composure, already cracked and groaning under the pressure of the evening, finally broke. A primal, irrational rage surged through him, overriding all sense and decorum. He couldn't just sit there and watch. He couldn't let this perfect scene play out without intruding, without somehow reinserting himself into a narrative that had so completely and utterly erased him. Fueled by 2 glasses of overpriced scotch and a lifetime of unchecked ego, he pushed his chair back abruptly. The legs scraped loudly against the polished floor, drawing a few curious glances. "What are you doing?" Brittany hissed, her eyes wide with alarm. The thrill of the drama was curdling into the fear of public embarrassment. "David, don't! Sit down. I'm just going to go congratulate them," he said, the words sounding hollow and false even to his own ears. He wasn't going to congratulate them. He was going to confront them. He needed to see Lauren's face up close, to search for some flicker of doubt, some hint that this was all a sham. He needed to make Owen Devereaux see him, the man who was there first. "Don't you dare," Brittany warned, her voice low and menacing. "You'll make a fool of yourself. Of us." But it was too late. David was already on his feet, weaving his way through the tables, his movements stiff and robotic. The short walk to the corner booth felt like a mile-long trek into enemy territory. With every step, he felt the weight of the room's attention. The applause had faded, but a palpable curiosity remained. He reached their table just as Lauren was wiping a tear of joy from her eye. She looked up, sensing his presence, and her radiant smile faltered, replaced by a look of stunned confusion. "David," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Owen Devereaux turned his head. His expression was calm, his gaze piercingly direct. There was no surprise, no anger. It was the look of a man who assesses situations instantly and is never caught off guard. He placed a protective hand on Lauren's arm. "Lauren, what is all this?" David began, his voice louder than he intended. The question was absurd, accusatory. "Is this some kind of joke? A publicity stunt?" Lauren stared at him, her confusion hardening into disbelief. "A joke? David, what are you talking about? And what are you doing here?" "I'm having dinner," he spat out, gesturing vaguely back toward his own table, where Brittany was trying to shrink into her seat. "And I see this circus. You, with him." He pointed a trembling finger at Owen. "I mean Owen Devereaux. Seriously, Lauren, how did you even meet him?" The question was laced with insinuation, a pathetic attempt to cheapen her happiness, to suggest she was some kind of gold digger who had schemed her way into this. Before Lauren could respond, Owen spoke. His voice was quiet, yet it carried an unmistakable authority that cut through David's blustering. "I believe this is a private conversation," he said, not to David, but to the air around him. It was a dismissal so complete it was almost physically palpable. He hadn't raised his voice, but the message was clear. "You are irrelevant." David, however, was too far gone to heed the warning. He focused his glare on Lauren. 10 years, Lauren. We were married for 10 years. You were a history teacher who liked gardening. Now you're this?" He gestured at her dress. The ring, the entire scene. "You can't just erase that. You can't erase me." It was then that Lauren found her voice. The shock had worn off, replaced by a profound, weary clarity. The woman who had cried silently into her pillow after discovering his affair was gone. The woman who had meekly accepted his terms in the divorce was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her own worth, a worth that had just been affirmed in the most beautiful way possible. She stood up slowly, her movements graceful and deliberate. She was no longer crying. Her eyes were clear and steady. "You're right, David," she said, her voice calm and even. It was the lack of anger that was so devastating. "I can't erase those 10 years, and I wouldn't want to. They taught me what I don't want. They taught me what I will never again accept from another person." She looked at him, not with hatred, but with a kind of detached pity. "You didn't know me. You saw what you wanted to see, a quiet, convenient accessory to your life. The moment I stopped being convenient, you threw me away. You didn't see my strength or my mind or my heart. You just saw boring." She paused, then glanced lovingly at Owen, who was watching her with immense pride. "Owen sees me," she said simply. "He sees all of me. The parts you ignored, the parts you belittled. He celebrates them. This," she said, holding up her hand with the magnificent ring, "isn't about the money or the name. This is about being seen. This is about being loved for who I am, not for who someone wants me to be." Her words struck David with the force of a physical blow. There was no argument to be made, no defense to be mounted. She had dissected him, his motives, his entire character, with surgical precision. "My life," Lauren continued, her voice gaining strength, "is no longer your business. My happiness is not a reflection on you, and it is certainly not a performance for your benefit. Now, I would appreciate it if you would leave. You are ruining what was, until this moment, the happiest night of my life." Owen Devereaux didn't say another word. He didn't have to. He simply stood beside Lauren, a silent, unshakable pillar of support. His presence was an exclamation point to her declaration of independence. Defeated, humiliated, and utterly exposed, David had no choice but to retreat. He turned and walked back to his table, the silence of the room pressing in on him. He felt like he had been stripped naked in front of a crowd. He hadn't just been dismissed. He had been rendered completely and utterly insignificant in the life of the woman he once thought he owned. Returning to his table was like walking back to the scene of a car crash. Brittany was staring at him, her perfectly made-up face a mask of cold fury. The romantic ambiance of their candlelit dinner had evaporated, replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. The half-eaten, expensive entrees on their plates looked grotesque and unappetizing. "Are you happy now?" she hissed the moment he sat down. Her voice was a venomous whisper. Was that little display of pathetic jealousy worth it? "The entire restaurant is staring at us." David slumped in his chair, the adrenaline from the confrontation draining away, leaving him feeling hollow and shaky. He glanced around. Brittany was right. People were looking. They weren't overt, but he could see the quick glances, the whispered comments behind napkins. He was the evening's entertainment, the jilted fool. I had to say something," he stammered, knowing how weak it sounded. "Say something? You look like a crazy person, David." Brittany's voice rose in pitch. "You went over there and picked a fight you couldn't possibly win. You didn't just embarrass yourself, you embarrassed me." The "me" hung in the air, heavy with implication. Her entire brand was built on an image of success, glamour, and dating a winner. His public meltdown had tarnished that image. "She's with a billionaire, David," Brittany continued, her words like sharp little daggers. "A real one. Not a project manager who has to save for 3 months to afford a dinner here. She left you, and she ended up with Owen Devereaux. What in the world does that say about you?" The question was rhetorical, but it hit its mark with brutal precision. It was the very question that had been clawing at the inside of his skull. The implication was clear. If Lauren could level up so dramatically, what did that make him? He wasn't the one who had upgraded. He was the one who had been a stepping stone, or worse, a dead end she had to escape from. From the corner of his eye, he saw Lauren and Owen preparing to leave. A waiter was helping Lauren with her coat. Owen discreetly handled the bill, a quiet transaction that involved no fumbling for a credit card, just a simple nod to the maitre d'. They were a universe of effortless grace. As they walked towards the exit, their path took them past David's table. He braced himself for a smug look, a triumphant smirk from Lauren, but she didn't even glance in his direction. Her focus was entirely on Owen, her hand tucked securely in the crook of his arm. They were in their own world, a bubble of shared happiness so complete that he didn't even register as a blip on their radar. It was the ultimate insult. He wasn't even worth a final parting glare. He was nothing. They disappeared through the grand wooden doors of the restaurant, leaving David alone with the wreckage of his evening. The spell was broken. Brittany looked at him now with undisguised contempt. The man she thought was her ticket to a better life had just been exposed as a second-rate pretender. "I can't believe this," she said, grabbing her purse. "My phone has been blowing up. People who are here are already texting my friends. This is a nightmare." "Brittany, wait." "No, I'm done." She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor, a mocking echo of his own earlier departure. "I need to be with someone who's going somewhere. Someone with a future. Tonight you just showed me your past. And honestly, it's way more impressive than you are." She turned and walked away without a backward glance, leaving him sitting alone at a table for two. The waiter, A young man with pity in his eyes approached cautiously. "Sir, will there be anything else?" David just shook his head, unable to speak. The waiter placed the leather bill folder on the table. David opened it numbly. The total was staggering, an obscene amount for a dinner that had brought him nothing but misery. He pulled out his credit card, the one he had been so proud of, the one with the high limit that signified his success. As he placed it in the folder, it felt like a cheap piece of plastic. He sat there for a long time, surrounded by the murmur of other people's happy evenings. He had walked into Aria that night feeling like a king, the master of his own destiny. He was leaving as a punchline, abandoned and alone, with nothing but an exorbitant bill and the bitter, undeniable truth. In his desperate quest for a shinier life, he had been the one to throw away the real treasure. He was the architect of his own, very public, ruin. The weeks following the disastrous dinner at Aria were a slow, agonizing descent into a quiet, personal hell. The initial shock gave way to a throbbing humiliation that followed David from the moment he woke in the morning to the long, sleepless hours of the night. The scene replayed in his mind on a torturous loop. The collective gasp of the restaurant, the serene confidence on Lauren's face, Owen Devereaux's dismissive calm, and Brittany's cold, furious eyes. Their relationship, already built on the shaky ground of ego and illusion, crumbled within days. The final conversation was not a passionate argument, but a cold, clinical dissection of his failures. "It's about image, David. You of all people should understand that," Brittany said, standing in the middle of the living room with a packed suitcase at her feet. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, a ridiculous affectation that somehow made her seem even more distant and severe. "My brand is aspirational. It's about leveling up. How does it look if I'm with a guy who gets publicly emasculated by his ex-wife's billionaire fiancé? Emasculated? I was defending my history. Our history," he argued, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Brittany let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You weren't defending anything. You were a ghost haunting a feast you weren't invited to. You made a scene, David. You looked weak and pathetic, and that's not a good look for me." She ran a perfectly manicured finger over the sleek, modern coffee table they had chosen together. "This," she said, gesturing around the apartment, "all of this, it was supposed to be a stepping stone for both of us. But it turns out your ex-wife was the one who knew how to climb. She jumped from a rowboat to a superyacht. You just fell out of the rowboat and are busy drowning." The cruelty of her words was breathtaking. She had distilled his entire life, his choices, and his marriage into a crude, materialistic metaphor. And the worst part was, she wasn't wrong. He had nothing left to offer her. His confidence, the very currency that had attracted her, was spent. She left without a backward glance, her departure announced to her followers via a cryptic post about knowing your worth and shedding negative energy, accompanied by a selfie of her pouting in an Uber. Without Brittany's vibrant, distracting presence, the apartment felt cavernously empty. The trendy, minimalist furniture they had picked out now seemed cold and impersonal. Her influencer ring light still stood in the corner of the living room, like a skeletal monument to a life he had failed to successfully cosplay. His work, once the bedrock of his identity, began to suffer. He'd walk into the office and the cheerful chatter would dip into a sudden, conspicuous silence. He was no longer the up-and-coming star. He was the subject of hushed conversations by the coffee machine, the guy whose ex-wife was marrying Owen Devereaux. In meetings where he once commanded the room, he now found himself stumbling over his words, his mind replaying Lauren's calm, devastating speech. His boss, a man named Henderson, called him into his office one afternoon. "David, close the door," he said, his tone devoid of its usual warmth. "Your numbers on the quarterly report are soft, and I've heard from your team that you seem distracted. Is everything all right at home?" It wasn't a question of genuine concern. It was a corporate inquiry. Henderson's gaze was cautious, appraising, as if questioning the judgment of a man who could make such a spectacular, personal mess. "I'm fine," David lied, his collar suddenly feeling tight. "Just a lot on my plate." "See that you manage it," Henderson said flatly. The promotion we discussed for the department head role, we've decided to go in a different direction. We need someone with complete focus right now. David nodded numbly. The promotion, the one he'd used as a justification for upending his life, the symbol of the bright future he'd promised himself, was gone. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of avoidance and regret. He'd come home to the silent apartment, order takeout he barely touched, and lose hours numbly scrolling through news websites and social media, a digital flagellant searching for new ways to punish himself. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, his thumb froze on the screen. It was a photo on the society page of a major news outlet from a high-profile charity gala for the city's art museum. There in the center of the frame stood Lauren and Owen. Owen looked exactly as he had at the restaurant, impeccably dressed, radiating a quiet, powerful charisma. But it was Lauren who commanded the attention. She was wearing a stunning deep green gown that shimmered under the light. Her hair swept up in a style that was both elegant and effortless. She wasn't just standing beside Owen Devereaux as a beautiful accessory. She was a presence in her own right. She was speaking animatedly to the museum's director, her expression intelligent and engaged, her hands gesturing as she made a point. David's eyes dropped to the caption below the photo. Tech mogul Owen Devereaux and his fiancée, art historian and restoration expert Lauren Pierce, who is set to join the museum's acquisitions board, funded by a new endowment from the Devereaux Foundation. Art historian and restoration expert. The words didn't just register, they detonated in his memory. A long-buried scene came rushing back with sickening clarity. They had been married for about a year. Lauren, still in her graduate program, had come home one evening, her face alight with a passion he hadn't seen since. She'd spent the day in the university lab, learning a new technique for removing centuries of discolored varnish from a 17th century oil painting. "You wouldn't believe it, David," she had said, her voice buzzing with excitement. "It's like watching a ghost emerge. You slowly reveal the artist's original colors, their true intention. It's like traveling back in time and helping them speak again." He had been sitting at the dining table looking over their finances. Her program was expensive, and her potential future salary seemed paltry. "That's a cute hobby, Laure," he had replied, his eyes not leaving the spreadsheet. "But we need to be realistic. The tuition is draining us. Maybe it's time to think about that teaching certificate. It's more stable. It's a real job." He remembered the way the light in her eyes had dimmed, the way her shoulders had slumped almost imperceptibly. She had argued, but gently, her passion slowly eroded by his relentless practicality. Within 6 months, she had dropped out of the program and enrolled in education courses. He had told himself he was being responsible, steering them toward a secure future. But looking at the photo of her now, a respected expert on the arm of a man who could fund entire museum wings, he saw his actions for what they were, an act of profound, selfish vandalism. He hadn't just steered her, he had broken something precious within her. He now realized with sickening clarity that Owen Devereaux hadn't just given her a ring. He had seen the masterpiece underneath the dull varnish of the life David had imposed on her, and he had carefully, lovingly restored it. A man with his resources and, more importantly, his perception, could give her back her life. He could fund her passions, connect her with the right people, and give her the platform to pursue the dreams David had convinced her to abandon. The final crushing realization settled upon him, heavy as a shroud. He hadn't lost Lauren to a billionaire. He had lost her long before Owen Devereaux ever entered the picture. He had lost her on all the nights he'd come home late without calling. He had lost her every time he'd belittled her interests as cute hobbies. He had lost her when he made her feel that her world was small, while his was the only one that mattered. He lost her the moment he typed his first illicit text to Brittany, seeking a cheap thrill to distract from a deeper dissatisfaction that was entirely his own creation. The billionaire wasn't the cause of his loss. He was merely the consequence. Owen Devereaux was a mirror, reflecting back at David the true value of the woman he had been too blind, too arrogant, and too foolish to see. David closed his laptop. The image of Lauren's happy, confident face burned into his mind. The silence of his empty apartment was his new reality. The sleek gray sofa, the polished chrome fixtures, The very air he breathed felt synthetic and sterile. He had traded gold for glitter, and now all the glitter had blown away, leaving him with nothing but a cold, empty room. The ghost of what he'd thrown away would haunt him for the rest of his days, a constant, bitter reminder that he was the sole author of his own empty story. David's story is a powerful, cautionary tale, not about money or status, but about value. He thought he was upgrading his life, but he failed to see the immense worth of the person right beside him. He chased a fleeting illusion of success, and in a single humiliating night was forced to confront the monumental reality of what he had thrown away. It serves as a stark reminder that the brightest futures are built not on superficial glamour, but on genuine connection, mutual respect, and the wisdom to cherish what is truly priceless. Sometimes the greatest loss isn't something that is taken from us, but something we willingly discard out of sheer blindness. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share it with someone who might appreciate this modern-day drama, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that explore the complexities of human relationships. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think was David's biggest mistake?